Welcome to Conflict Managed. I'm your host, Mary Brown. Conflict Managed is a weekly podcast about toxic work environments and how to fix them. We're glad you're here. Good morning, Garrett, and welcome to Conflict Managed.
I am so excited to be here. Thank you for having me, Mary.
I'm really looking forward to our conversation. Many topics we haven't talked about, and you are guest 190. So we've had a lot of episodes, but we're going to be hitting on new territory, which I'm excited about today. But before we get to all of that, I would like to hear about the first job you ever had as a young person.
Oof. First job I ever had as a young person, I was a dishwasher at a hotel. They had like a nice little diner there, and my job was to come in and clean up after the banquets and wash all those dishes and get them turned around. So that was at 13. Yeah. So
That's young.
yeah, it was fun. I had a good time. We had the radio going in the kitchen and we had the music
Right.
playing and you just go through the work. So
That's so interesting because yeah, my first job was I was pretty young too. I worked at a yogurt shop and it didn't really feel like work. Of course, I wasn't paying mortgage or anything like that. It was earning money for something that I wanted. But it was an exciting environment, even though I was doing relatively mundane tasks. Um, so how long did you do that?
I started that and then I transitioned pretty quickly into like being a busser. So carrying around the bus tubs, getting the dirty dishes from the table to the dishwasher. Apparently that's an upgrade. And then from there I went into serving. And then eventually I started running um, the banquets that we had. So we would do
Hmm.
weddings. We had like a rockabilly show one time in the banquet hall, which was pretty fun. There was like 7 or 8 bands. So I was in charge of making sure all of that went off without too many disasters. But yeah, so that was about 16 is when I transitioned into that role. Yeah.
Oh wow. Gosh,
Yeah.
that's a long time as a young person to be staying in one place, but then going up. When you think
hmm
back at that experience, do you remember what the management was like or what the atmosphere was like to work in?
It was pretty sink or swim.
Mm.
I remember there was one morning where we had 100 people from France. They would come through on their way from Vegas to Disneyland or vice versa, and they would stop at our hotel. They would get dinner out by the pool the night before. The next morning, we'd turn it around and have them set up for breakfast before they headed back on their tour bus. Um, and there was 100 people and me because everybody else had called out sick. In the morning, we still had the diner open, which is, serving all the hotel guests and then also, people in town. And we had one other server show up and she was pretty new. And she came to me, in a frantic haze, like, what's going on? Close to tears. I was a child and she looked at me and she's like, I can't keep doing I'm getting the menus. I'm taking the order. I'm bringing out the food. I'm bussing the table. And I was like, yeah, that is a lot. I agree. That is, you've been here for 3 days. That's a whole heck of a lot. Okay. When I get a second, I'll come help you. And I walk out there and she had one table of four regulars. I knew them all by name and all of their specific coffee orders. Um, so I went and finished, helped her out, and then went back to the 100 people back there. We were woefully understaffed, but it just was how things were,
Mm.
kind of a skeleton crew. Um, and that was kind of the management style was like, how much, can we really squeeze from this without giving as much as possible? And I
Mm.
seen that a lot in a lot of organizations where they're close to the tail end of their growth cycle
Mm.
where they were innovative and then they were the competitive market edge and now they're just trying to cut costs and save things as they go down into the point where they no longer are excited to be there anymore. So
Mm.
it was a really challenging environment to be in a leadership role because I turned to her and I was like, hey, this is your job. Like, this is what you have to do. I have 100 people back here. You have four. Nancy and Steve are going to be fine. That just put the coffee carafe on the table. That's all they care about. Of course, she didn't know that. She didn't know them by name, right?
Right.
But she left. She was like, "This isn't for me. I'm out of here."
Mhm. Mhm.
And when I was a kid, I was kind of exasperated because it's like it's four people, and I was so ingrained in the culture. But
Mhm.
she come from another position where like you got trained, you got developed, you knew what you were doing. You were never going to be left alone on your third day.
Mhm.
And I think she was probably right to walk out. I think she made the healthier of the two decisions between the two of us.
That is what a great story because it's this, what we think is normal or what we have accepted because we've just, in a way, it's like you walk into somebody's house and it has a certain kind of smell. To you, it's good or bad, but they don't even notice it because it's their normal, right? And when you come
Absolutely.
in from the outside, you say, "Ooh, what is that?" or "Oh, what is that?" And then you decide whether or not you're going to acclimate. But sometimes when we're in it, we just don't see it because it's, as you said, the life cycle, we get into it and it wasn't so overwhelming. And then just little by little, we take on more and more and more.
Yeah.
And it is interesting because also see that life cycle of um, what happens as you're growing and then the recession and what it
Yeah.
feels like and how people are showing up, especially as things are turning.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah.
And it's interesting too, because some of that's like culturally, like I think of I grew up with like a my first Sony, right? And then I had like the Walkman, and then I had the Discman, and then I had the Sony TV. And they had all the movies that I watched. They had all the music rights that I listened to. They had all the devices that I watched and listened to the music on. And now all of that's taken over by Apple. And they still own the rights to all the movies and the soundtracks and the licensing, and they have all the hardware still. It just seems so strange to me that there was this meteoric rise of Sony and then a huge drop off as far as me as a consumer is concerned. And Apple came in and took over all of that market share. And it just seems like nothing substantially changed between those two organizations, except for the type of approach or direction or vision that they had. And then everybody else followed along, right?
Yeah. It's a good lesson that when you are on the up, nothing is guaranteed, right? And how are you going to keep that momentum when markets shift, when tastes shift,
Yeah.
when the unknown comes, if you still want to be competitive and if you want to, as you were talking about that, I was thinking about Target. I used to love going to Target and buying clothes from Target. And now I look at it and I'm like, who is this for? Right? Who
Yeah.
are they making this stuff for? And it's still sad to me whenever I go into one of those stores because I think, well, what it was, and what it is now, and who let that happen? Right? How did
Yeah.
that happen?
Maintaining brand integrity at a large organization over a long period of time, it can't just be one person who's
Yeah,
making it happen or not,
right.
right? And so it's really challenging. Yeah. Really
Yeah,
challenging job. Yeah.
absolutely. So you went through your high school career, and what did you do after that?
Yeah, in the house I grew up in, money was at the center of most of the arguments and conflict in my house. So I grew up thinking the more money you would have, the less problems you would have. And I was like, oh, awesome. Okay, well, that's easy to solve for. Who has the most money? So when I went to college, I started interning for, investment banking type of firms, financial planners, and I got to know them pretty well. I also bartended at night to be able to pay for my bills. And then I saw them at work where I was getting them coffee, and then I saw them at night where I was serving them drinks. And they had a lot of financial security, but they also had a
Mhm.
lot of stress,
Mm,
and they had long hours. They weren't really happy. Their day-to-day existence was dependent upon, how the market turned that day or whatever was going on. And their inability to have autonomy over that seemed to put them like on the whip end, every little
mhm.
change they would feel it. And then you could see it ripple out to like their interpersonal relationships. You could see when they're at the bar, sharing their concerns that they were not the happiest of people, um, in their interpersonal lives, in their personal relationships. Of course, I had a selection bias because I was seeing the people that were coming to the bar and drinking after work, not the ones that were going home to their families after work, right? So who knows? May have been a different version of that had I been, a different position. Yeah.
So you saw that, but then did you persist in going for did you do a degree in finance or something along
No,
those lines?
I got my degree in philosophy, which was really fun, super interesting. Lots of critical thinking skills and like model application and kind of sorting through the weeds of very specific language, which was great. I really enjoyed it. And at the same time, because I was bartending, I needed like a lifestyle balance. So I started running quite a bit, and I have a
Mm.
tendency to overdo everything. So I put myself in pretty harm's way, lots of overuse injuries. So I went to a facility, met with a strength and conditioning coach, and he put me through the paces, showed me where to take it easy, where to push harder. And I really enjoyed my experience. And he seemed to have his bills paid. He also seemed to enjoy his family. He seemed to enjoy his relationship with his clients. And so that kind of woke me up that maybe it's not about all the money in the world. Maybe it's not about, um, you know, at the expense of your health and well-being, pursuing these things. If you actually have a genuine interest in something and it's valuable to other people, maybe there's like a trick there to like more fulfillment or well-being in life. And so that kind of shifted my perspective a little bit.
I wonder why. I mean, I know why in the abstract, but as a young person, right, that's
Mhm.
quite a vision to catch, to think about what you thought you wanted because of maybe family of origin issues,
Yeah.
what you thought you wanted, and then you saw counter examples. Oh, that's actually not getting what I want, which is this good life, right? I want the good life. What is the good life? But to ask obviously, these are very philosophical questions, but to ask those sorts of questions, but then actually not just leave it in that realm, but then to see examples and then say, okay, well, this is the kind of thing that I want. This is the kind of thing that's actually leading to the good that I want. What have you just always had this sort of disposition, or did something happen that you thought, no, I'm really going to pursue the good life, and it's not money, it's this something else?
Um, when I was a kid, I grew up skateboarding, and it was fun. It was like a nice way to get out of the house. And there was a skate magazine, and they did a spread there, and it was one of my favorite skateboarders at the time. And he had a really nice car. It was him in his really nice car, and then it looked like he had a really nice relationship because they showed his partner at the time in that car as well. And I looked at that magazine and I was like, okay, wait a minute. This man gets paid to do what he loves, this like very niche activity. He gets paid well enough to be able to afford this car, and he has this relationship. Okay. And he was in a movie, a skateboard movie called Fulfill the Dream. And so that idea of like fulfill the dream, I was like, oh man, he's really fulfilling the dream. He's doing it. That's the thing right there. And so that was kind of my first example of like eudaimonia, like the good life flourishing at like a really young age. It was just fed to me in a skateboard magazine, and you're
Mm,
so impressionable to that at a
yeah,
young age.
yeah.
But the tenets of that still felt like there was something that resonated there. Yeah.
Hmm. Yeah, it's such a great message though to get, however you're getting it, right? This idea of what is the good life, and then testing that out as you go into the world of work. I mean, it's a good to be gainfully employed, to be able to pay for your bills, and if anybody relies on you, those are goods. But there's always a question of how much do I need, which is a particular question, and it differs for different people for different reasons.
Yeah.
But then what am I willing to do to get that, right? With all of the looking at the whole of my time here, what is it going to be filled with? What do I think is meaningful, or bringing value? So you major in philosophy, kindred spirits. I also majored in philosophy and taught that for a long time. So then what did you
Yeah.
do after college?
Yeah, so after college, I opened my own business because I did the bartending. So I did a mobile bartending. So I was the backyard bartender for lots of fancy soirees in Southern California where people would hire me and I'd bring the full bar and we'd do the thing and it was great fun. There wasn't really scalable for that because the numbers didn't quite work out the way you would think they would, which was pretty unfortunate. You would have to have 5 or 6 different crews running to make a full living doing it.
Mm-hmm.
And the liability and headache of that didn't feel sustainable for me at the time. Um, but because I had that background in fitness, I went and ended up getting further education in that. And I started showing up and training clients, which is a lot of fun, working with people and professionals one on one, helping them increase their health and well being. And I was really passionate about it. I could see the changes when someone would go from being like the unfit person in their household to being the one that was now running the marathons and beating their partner's time. Um, One of my favorite clients, after her first child, she was like, I'm tired of not being the athlete in my home. I was an athlete in high school, and I'm not the athlete in my home. I'm not okay with that anymore. And so it was really fun to be on the finish line watching her finish her first marathon, a good 20 minutes faster than her husband, which was really exciting for the both of them and having them, get some celebratory drinks afterwards and watching them rube each other over like who's the better athlete now. That was pretty fun.
Yeah.
But the confidence and self-esteem that she was able to access through that,
Hmm.
the amount of possibility that that opened up, and then because she made fitness a priority for herself to be able to be there for her kids as they grew up in a way that her family wasn't for her, it
Hmm.
was really interesting getting to know these people because once you get in past like, okay, what's your goal? Okay, why is that important? Okay, what's important about that to you specifically? Okay,
Hmm.
why is that so like important to you? You would usually get a pretty powerful story from somebody. um, there's this. if they're not crying, they're not buying is like the story that we were told when we were in the sales positions for those jobs, where we would be told we need to get to the emotional center of why someone's choosing to do this work because push-ups and squats aren't fun.
Yeah.
If we don't understand the why behind they're doing that, we're not going to be able to get them to be able to do enough to see any types of results.
Mhm.
So it's a little trite and a little scary,
Mhm.
a little salesy, but it also was really powerful to be able to get to those stories and truly show up and care and help those people, support them through it.
I think
Um,
that that's really important, though, helping people find their why, and it's not just superficial. So, if you're going to do
yeah,
something that's difficult, so I do workplace conflict management, and
yeah,
the reason people aren't doing it when they're not doing it is because it's difficult, psychologically difficult for them for whatever reason. And so,
yeah,
if you're going to do this thing that's hard, you're going to have a really good reason for it, multiple reasons, because those
yeah,
reasons might change enough to make it so that you go ahead. You go ahead and have that conversation. You go ahead and prepare. You go ahead and act in accordance with what you want, right?
yeah,
So I would imagine we all want to be fit, but we're not all doing those steps to be fit. So what is the
sure.
disconnect? In philosophy, we call these second order desires. I want this one thing, but
Mhm.
actually I just want it, right? If I
Yeah,
wanted it, I would do it.
yep,
I want to want it, right? So that's a second order desire. I know that I should be doing this, but I don't want it enough. And so moving that up into the foreground,
mhm,
like what are these real reasons that I have that I can remind myself of that are powerful enough? Because if they aren't, most probably I won't do that thing that I'm terrified of or that I'm afraid of, that it's going to cause me pain. I'm perceiving it might cause somebody else pain. I'm not going
yeah,
to go through it unless what I think is possible on the other side is worth it, like really worth it.
absolutely. And that you know that the effort you're putting in will hopefully lead you closer to that outcome you're looking for. Because that's sometimes the hard part too is this effort the right effort? And how do I know? And
Yeah,
can I trust that to, in my darkest moments, continue forward even with this behavior when I don't feel like it in the moment? Yeah, it's
yeah,
hard
I
to do.
like that. I like that. It's just the right effort. I have this goal, but is this action or these actions going to actually get me there?
Yeah.
So I know that you are interested in biopsychological approaches to
Mhm.
well-being, right? So
Mhm.
not just the mind, but the body,
Yeah.
and also in nervous system regulation. So I would like you to talk to us a little bit about how that shows up at work. So in the everyday, you're in an office with people or whatever your situation is, and how does people's emotional intelligence, but specifically their ability to regulate themselves
Mhm.
emotionally. Um, how does that show up in the dynamics of a healthy work environment?
Yeah, great question. I would argue that a healthy work environment, that is the primary part of it. A lot of times we think of work as like the outcome measures because that's what people measure on the P&Ls.
Mhm.
That's what people are measuring. How much, cost of goods sold versus profits. Okay, and then we got the tax out. We got cost of labor. Okay, great. Whatever's left over, we did our job. And there's a lot of, economists that argue that that is the only job for people. And there's a lot of storied management principles that we inherited probably from like command and control, top
Mhm.
down, hierarchical, usually militaristic ideals of what true leadership is or means. And then we adopted it to a very different collaborative, generative, curiosity driven. And the more autonomy people have in a workplace, the more it is about that, honoring their curiosity, their excitement, their passion. And if we use those command and control styles of leadership, usually we're, you know, rounding off people down to the bare minimum and using them as just kind of a cog in a machine. And we're missing out on the generativeness of their emotions, their excitement, their enthusiasm, their passion. And so I would argue that if someone's getting stressed out at work and you're a leader at work, your job is to help them manage their stress. You are now their surrogate attachment figure. You are not their mom or their dad because they are an adult. But the role that our caregivers played when we were 4 or younger, where we don't have an ability to get our own needs met, we're reliant on these other people. So when we're upset, when we're crying, it's their job to attune to our needs to say, like, hey, are you tired? Are you hungry? Are you wet? Do you need to be dried? What's going on here? Do you just need to be calm and cared for? And a lot of parents do a good job at that. And they don't have to do it perfectly for a
Mhm.
child to be well developed. They should do it 30% of the time, which isn't horrific. Hopefully, they have enough time and resource to be able to do that. But as a leader, your new job, because we're still social creatures, even though we're adults, is not too dissimilar from that. If someone needs to be creative, they need to be collaborative. They can't do that if they're in a distressed state. The part of our body that shows up that allows us to connect and be attuned to other people and focus on work and do high quality generative work requires us to be in our zone of tolerance, our window of tolerance. And if we're not in that, you're not getting the best from somebody.
Mhm.
So, as a leader, if you can attune to your person and actually provide a safe enough space for them to go from dysregulated to regulated, more often than not, you're going to get more benefit for that person in the long run.
I agree with what you're saying, but I can imagine, and I've spoken to leaders who are, that's not my job. I'm an adult, they're an adult, we're professionals. You show up, you do good work, and
Absolutely.
that's how you that I mean that's it. I'm not holding hands, right? We hear this. I'm not going to hold anybody's hand,
Yeah.
and I think it misses the mark because insofar as you're working with humans, and you need to realign your expectations to what your workforce is and the kind of work that they are doing today.
Yep.
Um, so how do you get that message across to both leaders and just everyday workers when they feel frustrated about the messiness of people, that people aren't cogs, that we're not just machines, we're people?
Yeah. And some of that, there's a different spectrum of leadership, right? People are like, oh, is mentoring the right type of coaching or, delegating? And I love that like situational leadership model that I forget who has it, but and then they talk about which one is appropriate based upon the person's competence. So if they have never done this task before, it is your job to show them. Then once they've done that a few times, it's your job to watch them do it. Then it's your job to then make sure and audit the things that they could be doing better. And then it's your turn to just be like, hey, you're so good at this now. I just need you to get this, this, and this done. But if we kind of mess that up on someone's development, we're asking them to do something that they can't do. That's like an unfair expectation, right? And so when I go back to me being 15 and 16 and my my brand new person's coming in, I can't do this. And I'm like, yeah, definitely cannot do this. And I can't train you right now.
Right.
This isn't great for anybody. Yeah, terrible situation, right?
Mhm.
Um, and I think about how hard it was to keep people staffed for that position and then to keep them trained. And then because they felt so dysregulated, they felt like they weren't empowered to be able to do their job well. How many of those customers had that type of experience? And how many times was that diner empty
Mhm.
and had nobody in it? Because when they did come in, they were like, this isn't great. No one
Mhm.
here seems like they want to be here. So why would I want to be there with my good money sitting down and
Mhm.
hanging out? It does eventually roll downhill, it eventually shows up. So it's really challenging. The idea, though, is even if you're doing all of those things, but you're not attuning to that person's need in that moment, it falls on deaf ears.
Mhm.
So we all have attachment styles based upon how our parents raise us. Sometimes we develop one where our strategy to create safety is to move away from people. Sometimes when we feel stressed, it's to move closer. So the same leader, the same manager will be accused of being a sink or swim leader by one team or someone on their team. And
Right.
then that same exact leader with the same exact behaviors, no change at all by someone else on the team be like, they're the worst micromanager I've ever worked for. And it's less about the leader's behaviors or beliefs or actions or values, and it's more about the attachment styles and the match or mismatch between those people. So if you have a secure attachment style, it's really easy to adjust how you show up to be able to respond to what that person needs. The more insecure your own attachment style it is, the harder it is to navigate those dynamics that show up at work. And that lack of understanding, attunement, or safety creates conflict because already you feel like you're in a heightened adversarial position. And now our guard is up. And it's really hard to navigate tough conversations if we're in that position in the first place. Every hostage negotiator will be like, no, hey, you have to build rapport. Every therapist will say the therapeutic relationship is the thing that is therapeutic. Whatever techniques they're using, without that there first, it doesn't really work.
Yeah. And so I think about all these different work environments, and you have people who are in just a variety of different places in their life,
Yeah.
how they feel physically, how they are emotionally.
Yeah.
Um, you have people who are more or less regulated in general, and
Yeah.
most conflict comes about it's some sort of emotional response, right? People, these,
100%.
when we have unmanaged conflict, conflict's not the problem, it's the unmanaged conflict. And so I'm a fond believer of you doing yourself, you doing you, showing up doing good work, but that you're not responsible for other people's emotions, right? I can't make somebody, you can lead the first to water, you can't make them drink. You can set the conditions.
Sure.
So if you as the leader, you are you're practicing these good practices, you really are trying to be particular to the people in front of you, but a few of the people on your team, for whatever reason, are unable to see it or unable to adjust. And for lack of a better word, maybe they're being obstructionist or curmudgeonly, or they're not being collegial.
Mhm.
How would you recommend a leader move forward in that situation?
Yeah, I would argue that maybe they need to double down on that first part that you mentioned. And I can speak from my personal experience. Eventually, in my career, I was leading a team over 7 locations, which is kind of challenging in Southern California, so spread out over a long distance. Each location had 10 to 25 different service providers. We had to hire, train, and develop them. And they had really tight production budgets that they had to manage every single shift. And it was a service-based providership business. So it was really hard to get these individuals with all their expertise to be able to provide it in a way that was sustainable. And historically, they weren't always you know, they were more reactive than they were proactive in developing their future. And so to kind of help them shift that mindset was a big challenge. You can try to hire for it, but when you're hiring for that large of a population
Mhm.
consistently, and they have specialty experience or like licensure, it makes it really hard because you can only do with the people that have the credentials that you need. So you don't have the luxury of saying goodbye. You're not the right hire. So you have to make sure that you are providing the best service for that person. I thought I was doing a great job. I was working long hours. Every time there was a conflict or a mistake or something was going on, I would take it on as the leader to try to go in and do the best I could do. Um, and it worked. The numbers were there. People seemed to enjoy working for us. I was really passionate about the work. But my back pain, my hip pain, my interpersonal relationships at home and with my family were really stressed. My cute little dog, there was days where she was less cute and more, uh, just a dog, but how it felt to me was very different, right?
Yeah.
And so I was definitely in the stages of that burnout. And I thought it was really just me because I would look on the P&Ls and I would see everybody else doing well. We talk and see each other in the halls and be like, "Hey, how's it going? Good. Everything's good. Okay. We're all good. Okay." And there was one person who'd been with the organization for 20 plus years of the organization's 25. And I always looked at him as kind of like an exemplar, like, wow, okay, if he can do it for this long,
Mhm.
I have a lot to learn. I can be better. I can do this. Let's see. Um, but there was a point in which he got let go pretty quickly from the organization. And it was about 2 weeks later, I was in a meeting with his replacement. And in that meeting, we got in word that without his position, without his title, so much of his identity had been poured into this organization for so long that he had decided there was not much left for him to live for without that.
Mhm.
And so it was a really big wake up call because here I
Mhm.
am with his replacement after his dedication and service, the exemplar in the company.
Mhm.
And it was that much of a burnout that was resulting in that type of loss. It
Mhm.
was pretty tragic. So I looked around and was like, okay, there's only so much you can change when you're a big organization like this. What about myself can I change? And so I went and got some support and some help. And after 90 days, I looked around, the P&Ls were better than ever, but so was my team. Apparently,
Yeah.
I was the jerk that was holding everybody back from doing their best work because I was pushing for what could be the vision, the excitement, the passion, and leaning into these goals and driving people and getting it done. And I was sacrificing my own health in the process of doing that and then setting that example for other people where they feel like they had to do that as well.
Mhm.
And so all of our well being was rounding down and getting less generative. And then the effort we had to do to try to get the work done was even
Mhm.
more effortful. And there
Mhm.
was more conflict because of that, because we had shorter attention spans, shorter fuses, and then there was less resources to be able to manage those conflicts as well when they came up. So there
Mhm.
was more strife and more stress, and we all got the job done. We were all professionals, but the effort it took us to maintain that professionalism was exponential and unnecessarily so.
Mhm. Thank you for sharing that story. Some people are lucky enough or have just had life circumstances so that they don't know, like, oh, toxic work environment, or,
Yeah,
it can't be that bad, right? It can be that bad. It can be stress can be a literal killer in a variety of ways.
literal. Yeah.
And it's serious. And I do think that every organization and every person, not just, I mean, we're all leaders to a certain extent, right? Every person has a moral obligation to treat themselves and their neighbor well, right?
Yeah.
And to look around. And the point that you made at the end there, I think is just putting this really emphasis on you can be a professional and everybody around you could be a professional and it could still be a very bad environment. On the surface, we know how to play. We know how to show up. I can plaster anything on my face. Like I know how to do it, right?
Sure.
Um, as most of us do who are professionals. But that is not sustainable. It, as you said, it just sucks up the life of you, your creativity. When you're in a conflict, part of your brain is just ruminating and it's taking you away from, and therefore you can't do as good work. Or if you're going to, it's going to take so much longer, which then, as you said, is just this cascade of problems. So, from just a basic numbers, financial, um, just from finances, it makes sense to be concerned with your employees' well-being. It makes sense to deal with conflicts early, often swiftly and justly. To have these life-giving policies of realizing that you have people that work with you, and the more you take care of your people, then the better work they're going to be able to do, and the healthier they are. Therefore, you get more longevity, word of mouth. It just balloons. All of the things grow out, when you have this rich soil, right? And then everything withers when it's not watered, right? You might still pluck that fruit, but it's smaller and shriveled. And you gotta have to have more of them to make you know, your summer salad or whatever it might be.
Yeah. And finding hardy seeds or hardy strains, right, to the gardening, like GMOs, like we're trying to do that. Absolutely. But maybe it's because we're not really re-nourishing the soil as much as we need. So we need harder. Like it almost feels
Mhm,
like it's this arms race or this Cold War of like who's going to blink first. And I think if we're talking about military tactics and our leadership styles are coming and imported in from that, there's this implicitness that shows up where we think that people are just interchangeable.
mhm,
And in some environments and in some segments of business, sure, a business model can be scaled to make it look like that. But
mhm,
for the rest of them that aren't, which is the majority, it's not a sustainable model in the long run.
mhm. And even if, I think there is something to thinking that everybody is replaceable in just the sense of, I think it's a bad mantra when you think it all rests on me because it can lead to overwork and um, giving your life to the company, but they're not giving it to you, right? This
Yeah.
weird understanding of loyalty, even a weird
Yeah.
understanding of professionalism and identity, as you so
Yes.
talked about with this colleague. Um, and so having that, like, where is my identity? What is the meaning of life? What is the meaning of my life? How is my work integrated in that? And how can I be fruitful all the way around? Um,
Absolutely.
and when we are still in this industrial revolution ideology of we're just cogs in the machine, that's
Yeah.
problematic. And so I think organizations can flow, right? They flow. They adapt to market changes, to personnel changes, but those positions are held by these individuals with their own ideas and their own backgrounds on what they can contribute. And we either
Yeah.
get to take advantage of that diversity by asking for it, by making this conditions so that people can show up in their best self.
Yeah.
So when you think about having these best helping people show up to their best self. I'm really interested in civility standards. And,
Hmm.
and I think if we think about a safe space, we think about psychological safety, we need to have these basic agreements, right? Work agreements, contracts, social contracts within work of how I'm going to expect to be treated and how I should expect to treat others. And we are going to more or less be able to do that depending on what's going on with us, with our health and our own emotional regulation.
Yeah.
So, how do you see that as a leader while being really particular and in tune to the individuals and not writing people off unnecessarily, but also keeping the whole, standing up for the whole environment and not letting what happens all too often, the one that is, spoiling the bunch?
Yeah. Um, I think it's a really fun analogy or metaphor I've heard about this is when you have a choir there, right? Everybody has their assigned part. but you have a lot of people all working together towards a common goal. Sharing it with an audience for the common experience can give people goosebumps and chills, right? But some days you might be a little sick. You might have a bit of a head cold. You might need to take it easy. You may not be able to sustain that note at that exact timbre for as long as you normally can. And if you have a big enough choir, it's safe for you to be able to take the time to drop off that note early, and it doesn't affect the audience's experience. It's safe enough for you to be able to attune to your own needs and care for yourself in that moment. So that way you can go show up the next day. And instead of limping through for a week or two, trying to do your best you possibly can, and then prolonging that sickness, and then eventually maybe even harming your instrument. That same idea, I think, shows up in workplaces as well. If we're in a team environment and we all have our role and we all have our ability to move forward, people talk a lot about the challenges that show up in silos where it's just this one person doing this one thing.
Mhm.
And then now, if they get sick, if something goes on in their personal life, they have someone else in their family that they have to care for. If something else becomes a priority besides work, which is an appropriate thing that's going to happen to all of us at one point in our life or another for lots of really valid reasons,
Right.
if we don't have a system that can account for that, we don't actually have a system that's sustainable.
Yeah.
We need to
Yeah.
be able to have enough, talent deep is I think what coaches call it, right? Enough
Mhm.
bench talent back there to make sure that if that person does need to take a break, that that's okay, that they can do that. And if we allow them to do that and create that psychological safety where they know it's okay to take that time,
Mhm.
makes it easier to get them back sooner and being more generative. And it endears them to that organization because they were cared for by the people. And that makes a big difference in the long run for others.
Absolutely. And I like that you use the word system, right? A lot of times we just scapegoat, this is the person who's spoiling the bunch, and not thinking about, well, what is the system in place when somebody has a gap in performance of your behavior, or when somebody's got some sort of personal issue, which is going to happen to all of us many times, right? We're going to make
Yep.
mistakes, things are going to happen. And so preparing for that on the front end, knowing it's inevitable, it's going to happen. So what are we going to do so that we can act in concert with our values and that people can um and hopefully we leave people better than we found them. So if somebody kind of comes in and they are emotionally and dysregulated, and hopefully through the process of being treated really well, and they might
Mhm.
be shown another way. So can you tell us, I imagine maybe some people aren't so familiar with, um, emotional regulation, being dysregulated, what it looks like at work, maybe specifically, um, being regulated, being dysregulated, and how to get better at regulating your emotions.
Yeah, it's a really challenging skill to develop. Lots of people for a long time have been working on trying to figure out the best, most efficient ways to do this. Um, but I think sometimes it's easier to think about what it feels like when it's not there versus what
Mm,
it is there.
yeah.
When you show up and something little happens, or you're on the way into work and something silly happens that it normally does, and all of a sudden it's a big deal. You're angry, you're frustrated, you're overwhelmed. Maybe you're so overwhelmed, you're like driven to sadness and like desperation. Like, what the heck is the point of any of this?
Mhm.
As you spill coffee on your shirt on the way into work in the car, right? Like
Right.
something as silly as that can turn into an existential crisis for some people.
Hmm.
That is indicative that like the well-being that they have access to on a base level is not enough to sustain them for what they actually need to be able to do what they're doing. That they are working above and beyond. They're running into the red there to be able to do that.
Hmm.
And so in that situation, emotional regulation is going to be really hard, regardless of the practices that they implement, the specifics of it, because they don't have enough of a baseline to build a firm, solid foundation on. But if we've taken care of that, okay, great. There's enough well-being there. Okay. And then something happens. Okay, well, how do I do that? How do I respond? How do I react? How does it affect me? What do I do with those things? That still requires a level of having addressed some of those subconscious beliefs that we develop when we're a younger person. If we have this implicit assumption that we are a no good, very bad person, and we use our accolades, our titles, and our achievements at work and other places to prove to ourselves and others that no, 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 I really am worth something. I do deserve this. Look, I can do all the cool things. That must mean that it's proof that I'm not a bad person or I'm a
Hmm.
terrible, no good, very bad person. If that belief is there, it's really hard to be emotionally regulated because every little mistake you end up using as proof that you
Hmm.
are not great. And so it really does affect you to be able to go through your day to day. Any little mistake in an email, any little mistake in a presentation, And that raises our anxiousness level. It raises the risks of what it feels like to be able to be you when you're operating day to day. And so when anything shows up, it's almost impossible to become emotionally regulated or stay that way or recover
Mhm.
quickly, because it really does feel and is in your body a reaction to the belief of that. And if you truly believe you're a no good, very bad person, it's really hard to operate.
Mm.
And so if we have well-being, we have some of those beliefs addressed. Now things happen. It's okay. We can recover. And so oftentimes when we think about the skill of emotional regulation, we have to look at kind of the prerequisites of what do we need to be able to have in place to be able to practice that in the first place. But then once we're there, we can be like, okay, what am I feeling? Why am I
Mhm.
feeling it? Where am I feeling it at? When's the last time I felt it? And what's similar and different about this situation? Okay, great. Now what do I want to do about it? Is it something I can just move on from? Or is there something in a pattern here that's deeper that I need to address and change how I show up and behave and act? But that skill doesn't happen in the moment. That
Mhm.
happens at the end of the day. And often we don't make enough time to kind of unpack some of those things.
Mhm.
We just have the thing that happens, our reaction to it, and then we distract ourselves or get moved on, or we reach
Mhm.
for a coping mechanism. And
Mhm.
sometimes for people, that's going for a run, like it was for me. Some people reach for a drink, which it was for me. But there are healthier mechanisms than those two to be able to sit there and actually dive in and see what's more generative if you actually look into those emotions.
All right. So, how do we, I hear this, the first prerequisite, right? The first thing you got to do is address
Yeah,
these beliefs, right?
yeah,
That maybe served you at one time and not serving you now. So,
yeah.
how do you do that? Is it just therapy? Is it what? What do we do if we're stuck?
Yeah. So it feels like some of the principles in any therapeutic intervention is this idea of memory reconsolidation, where you bring up a belief and whatever state you're currently in as you're pondering that belief, if we use a philosophical term. If you're in a dysregulated state, if you're feeling anxious, overwhelmed, or depressed, when you're pondering that belief, when you put that belief away, that anxiousness, that depressive state, that frustration gets tied to that belief and that association, and it strengthens it over time. And so then it can become very powerful. And so the same process can be used differently. If I bring up that painful past learning, that belief about myself, the world, and others, and I'm in a ponderous state where I'm actually in a relaxed, restorative state when I'm thinking about it, when I put that memory away, the next time my memory goes back to call it up, it feels a little bit different. So it doesn't change what happened to you. It doesn't change the facts of the case. But what it does change is like the soundtrack, the
Mm.
lighting scheme,
Mhm.
the tone of the voice of the people in there. Because memory
Mhm.
is malleable. And so it's
Mhm.
really interesting that every time you recall a memory, you're not recalling the original incident. You're recalling the last time you recalled it.
Mhm.
And so that's why it's not the most reliable eyewitness testimony in the court of law, because it changes. That's why we have nostalgia. You know, when I think back to a McDonald's cheeseburger as a kid, oh, I can feel it. The taste is just goodness in my mouth. Now, if I go to McDonald's and I bite into that cheeseburger, there's a very different experience between what
Right.
I imagine it to be versus what it actually feels like. My stomach doesn't appreciate it. So,
Right.
but that belief still persists, right?
Mm.
Because it was such a salient experience at that time. And so it really is challenging to update those beliefs. It does take repetitions, but it's something that you can work on. Therapy
Mm.
is a great way to do it. Working with a coach or mentor is another way of doing it. But if you're aware of the belief in the first place, if
Mm.
we don't have that piece, it's really hard. And most
Right.
of us, they've been there for so long. Like a fish doesn't know it's wet. It's been swimming in the water for so long. It's so hard to know that there's something else out there.
Mm.
Um,
Yeah, it's hard to notice, but once you draw your awareness, right? So so the prerequisite
yeah.
to the prerequisite, right, is to figure
Mhm.
out what it is in the first place. And then I mean, I'm not a therapist, but kind of like
Yeah.
exposure therapy, you're re-exposing yourself, but in this safer environment, you said is you're relaxed and you're able to look at it and reframe
Yeah.
it and then think about that and put it back away. So that when you
Yep.
recall it, the last time you recalled it was in this relaxed environment. That's interesting. I like
Yep.
that.
And that's when exposure therapy is probably at its most effective. Sometimes people do exposure therapy where they put you into a very stressful situation where you're very heightened,
Hmm.
and then they expect you to be able to come out of that the other side having done the task. And that might work. And it does work sometimes. But often it also brings that anxiousness to it. So then when people are left on their own, alone, to do that task by themselves, they find themselves in procrastination. They find themselves not wanting to do it. Not that they don't know they can. They know they
Mm-hmm.
can, and they even know
Mm-hmm.
what they need to do it. But they find themselves not doing it because they want to avoid the anxious feeling of that emotion. Why would you put yourself out of your comfort zone just because there's that incentive out there if the strong emotions that you will actually feel are more salient or pertinent to you in that moment than the future eventual maybe possible
Maybe.
benefit that you could
That's
get?
right.
We have the very real feeling versus the
Right.
potential possibility.
Right.
It's hard to get those to do the math in a way that actually moves you forward unless you've
Yeah.
had that positive experience where it didn't trigger those feelings, where we operated underneath the neural edge, where we created that sense of safety. So we moved you from the comfort zone to the growth zone, not by pushing you through it or dragging you through it,
Right.
but instead by increasing that safety zone so it feels safe enough to move forward, even if it's new, challenging, and different.
Yeah. Yeah, when I think about conflict and helping people practice, right? So I do lots of talks, but I'm more interested in the practical application of it. I think about
Yeah,
the kind of virtue, right? You get it through habit, habituation. How do you get any sort of good habit? You got to do it, right?
you got to do
Um,
it.
and I always, when I'm talking to people, and because I taught philosophy forever, I mean, I'm so used to an audience not buying what I'm saying, right? I'm used to, all of these ideas, and these students are, oh, what
Yep.
is she talking about? That's just ridiculous. And
Yeah.
so I see all this resistance that I get because I've come to realize that a lot of times what people are thinking about is the problem, the biggest thing. There's
Yeah.
no way, Mary, I cannot talk to that person. They're irrational, that I'm all whatever, they catastrophize. And maybe that's
Yeah.
true, right? I don't know.
Yeah.
But that's not where you start, right? You
It's not.
start with the small little wins. You have that conversation, maybe about nothing with somebody that's a significant other or a friend, and then maybe you move to something with that person that is something very small, like this is, when we go out, 9 times out of 10, we have to go out to where you want to go out. And if then you go through the process and we catastrophize so much. We think if I say something, this
Yeah.
negative thing is most likely to happen. We don't think if I say this thing, all these good things are more, right?
Yeah.
So, but you get those wins and you see, oh, okay. And it's just this little by little, but it takes sustained intentional effort to have a good, healthy work environment. It takes sustained intentional effort to retrain ourselves to get those good habits. It's
Yep.
easy to pick up the habit of smoking and hard to break it. It's harder to pick up these good, healthy habits,
Yep.
especially I think when it comes to interpersonal healthy habits, when we have these long-standing detrimental beliefs that are keeping us back.
Yeah. And sometimes you'll see people where they're more than willing to meet someone else, those 9 times out of 10, we go to where you want to go at the expense of themselves to
Mm,
keep that other person happy, to
yeah,
maintain that sense of closeness. It's a nice working strategy. People call it people pleasing. It seems to be effective to a certain point, except for you're doing things that you don't want to do. So you're like wearing this mask
yeah,
and you're like, yeah, look, my mask is getting closer to these people. They really like that mask.
right,
But the further that mask gets from who you actually are and what you care
yeah,
about, you're actually isolating yourself by going out of your way to, you know, people please or to avoid authentic, genuine connection and intimacy, to avoid that conflict of like being seen, being vulnerable, standing up for yourself with someone else and understanding that
hmm
that will still be okay in that relationship or it won't. And that's okay
hmm
too.
hmm
Maybe you
hmm
don't need to be close to that person. Maybe it wasn't meant to be, right?
right,
Um, yeah, but knowing that you'll be okay regardless is, I
yeah.
think, challenging for a lot of people.
I think that what you just said speaks a lot to the loneliness epidemic that
Mm,
people are talking about at work and elsewhere. And it's just this really sad, interesting trend because we're supposed to be more connected than ever, right? You're in California, I'm in Tennessee, but we have all these ways that we can connect with one another. And a good question is, what am I connecting with? Am I connecting
yeah,
with you? Am I connecting with, because what does social media train us to do? To present, right? To curate whatever is
yeah,
around us. The picture that we post or the video that we post was the 100th one, where I've just
yeah,
got the right tilt and the right lighting and it's just enough cropped enough so you don't see all the garbage below me, right? And so we train ourselves both in cowardice and in inauthenticity and in distancing.
yeah,
And then we wonder why we're alone and people don't have friends. You're like, what do you mean you don't have friends? Yeah, because what does it mean to be a friend? What does it mean to be a true friend? What does it actually look like? And what does it require of me? It actually
Yeah,
requires something quite significant in order to be in any kind of intimate relationship with anybody. Um, but how are you going to develop that, right? It takes it to kind of, you don't just get it because you want it,
yeah.
right?
Takes effort. Yep.
Yeah.
Takes intentionality, sustained intentionality over time, for sure.
So will
Yeah.
you talk about how your A3 framework, when we think
Mm.
about our workplace environments, can lead to more healthy, flourishing work environments? So what is it and how can it lead to healthier work environments?
Yeah. Creating a healthy work environment internally, externally, and then by extension, the people that you're working with, through, and around is challenging work. There's so many components that we've talked about, so many places where it can go sideways, right?
Right.
Uh, so the A3 framework is an attempt to simplify that as best as possible, at least to wrap our mind around it a little bit. And so it starts with like assessing who you are, what you need, what your unique nervous system needs are. And then the next part is, okay, now that we know that, we can set some intentionality and set up some projects to make sure that we can accommodate our unique needs. And then once we have those accommodated, that provides us that a wider window of our window of tolerance, right? A bigger capacity to handle stress and discomfort and conflict without it overwhelming our well being. And then from there, from that space, we can now be like, okay, how do I work best? Great. How can I align these tasks to meet me where I'm at? So that way it costs me less to be able to do these things. So I can get that same outcome with all that extra effort that's not showing up on the W 2 or the 1099 or the investment spreadsheets. Yeah.
So how would somebody, as we're winding up here, how would somebody find out about their unique nervous system needs? Is that something that you do with your business? Where would somebody find out this about themselves?
Yeah, absolutely. If they want to be really professional, they can follow me on LinkedIn. I talk about some of that there. If they want to be more personable, they can follow me on Instagram. I talk about it there. But the assessment piece is kind of these big seven drivers. We start off with your sensory processing thresholds. So some people need a lot of stimulation to feel comfortable in their nervous system. Other people's needs way less. And so if you put that person who's trying to do work in a crowded environment, the whole time they're trying to draw their attention back to work, that extra effort that they have to do
Mm,
inhibits their ability to be able to focus. Someone else, you put them in a library setting and they're just singing songs in their head to try to stimulate themselves. They're playing with everything around them to get enough stimulation to translate that into momentum to get their work done. And so matching what your internal needs are from the experience to the external environment you find yourself as best as possible is really powerful. There's that cute little study with 4-year-olds where they give them the marshmallow and they say,
yes.
hey, if you don't eat this marshmallow when I come back, I'll give you another one. And they
Mhm.
followed up with the kids that were able to say no, and they were wildly successful compared to the ones that said yes to the first marshmallow. And it's interesting because there's a gentleman, he's a Canadian psychologist, works with children, about following up with the kids who said, I'm going to eat this one. I can't wait for that other one to come back. And when he found them, there was a couple things. One, lots of stress at home. Two, the environment that they tested them in was at odds with their sensory processing needs.
Mm,
So their sensory intelligence, the thing they need to feel okay in their body, was not the environment that they were tested in. And that seemed to
mm,
be the most contributing factor, regardless, after controlling for everything else. It just so happened that they were in a classroom setting.
mm,
And so the kids that were able to be aligned with that environment academically succeeded. And then they were able to use that academic success and all the feelings that come from that to make generative career choices for themselves.
mm,
So that piece is like something we don't think about at all. We're so habituated to just the environments we find ourselves in. But it seems to have a really big draining effect on our ability to perform our executive functions, which are required to sustain intention over a long period of time where there's not a
mhm,
nice type feedback loop. So that's
mm,
one of the beginning things that we assess. We also talk about attachment styles, like you and I have talked about today. We talk about some of those subconscious and limiting beliefs that people have developed at a young age. We talk about values, passions, and strengths and how you can act in them or against them and what that does for you. And even if you're appreciated for a strength you have, but it's not a strength that you appreciate about yourself,
mm,
even that sometimes can make it
mhm,
hard to show up consistently. And then your executive functions. What do you do when you do best? Are you really good at task initiation or are you better at like taking something and pushing it across the finish line? Are you a great procrastinator where you just sit down and think and think and think and think and think, and then you need someone else to help you move it to action? But if you know that about yourself, it makes it easier to align your work to how you work best. So we talk about that as well.
Yeah. Yeah, ending with philosophy, know thyself, right? And
Yeah.
I love, oh gosh, I feel like I could talk to you for ever so long, but this whole idea of environment. And we just, again, back to we don't spend much time thinking about our bodies and how much our bodies, as if we're ghost machines, like they're just floating around here and we're really in here, we're in our heads and we're just looking
Yeah.
out as if what's going on biologically isn't, as if we aren't one whole thing. So.
Absolutely.
So,
Yeah.
Garrett, this is my final question for you. When you look into the future of work, what do you think needs to happen so that not only will all people be treated with dignity and respect, but that they'll
Mm.
be encouraged to thrive and flourish?
So I think about this often, actually. And I think the easiest way for people to think about it for themselves is if you choose to continue to believe the myth that success requires sacrifice,
Mm.
what does your next week, next month, next year look like? If instead we choose to think about something else, we do a little mind game with ourselves and we imagine that success is actually dependent upon your well being, not at its expense, that success is a natural
Mm.
result from your well being. What does tomorrow look like? What decisions would you make differently and how would you feel? How would your relationships feel? How would your work feel? And if we compound that over the next rest of your career, how much more enjoyable would your life be? Would it move
Mm.
you closer to that thriving, that flourishing, or would it move you further away?
Mm. That's fantastic. What a wonderful thing to think about and a great way to end. Garrett, thank you so much for your time. I've just really enjoyed our conversation.
Thanks for having me here, Mary. It was super fun.
Take care. Garrett, thank you so much. I know I say this sometimes. I really could have talked to you for another hour about all those different points. And especially as we started to really get into emotional regulation or your nervous system, regulating your nervous system. I think that's all so very interesting. And dear listeners, I hope that you enjoyed it as well. Conflict Managed is produced by Third Party Workplace Conflict Restoration Services and hosted by me, Mary Brown. You can find us online at 3pconflictrestoration.com. Come back. We have new episodes every Tuesday. And if you would please like and subscribe wherever you are listening or watching this podcast, it's greatly appreciated. I'm happy to say that my new book is just coming out in a few weeks on January 13th called Winning the Generation Wars at Work, Making Your Age an Asset. And in this new year, in 2026, Conflict Managed is going to be talking about generational differences. At least one or not two podcasts a month, we're going to be focusing on how do we really have these healthy work environments with different generations that we find ourselves. We will continue to have our lovely guests who talk about wonderful topics as Garrett did today, but we're also going to be focusing on this year these generational divides and how we can and help work at cross purposes, right? How we don't have to be in a war, how we can win together. I'm really looking forward to this year with you. And please reach out to me if there's a guest that you would like on or a topic that you would like or somebody that you think would be perfect to be interviewed on this topic. You can find me at 3pconflictrestoration.com, 3pconflictrestoration@gmail.com. I'd appreciate that. Our music is courtesy of Duff Pilot. And remember, conflict is normal and expected. Let's deal with it. Until next time, take care.